Hi everyone, thank you for joining our Xcelero webinar. We are happy to have both Julie and Karan here with us to help say goodbye to testing in NetSuite manually. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please enter them in the chat box below. Julie, I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thank you, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm Julie Ginches, the CEO of Xcelero, and I'm joined with Karan Karandikar, who is CTO and co-founder of Xcelero. We're going to kick off this with just a couple of slides so that we can give you the high-level overview of who we are and how Xcelero came to be and what it does, and then we'll jump into the demo with Karan. So just a little bit of background. Xcelero's co-founders have about 20 years experience in the ERP space implementing on-premise Oracle EBS. About 6 years ago, they made the transition to all NetSuite. And after a couple of years, they noticed a lot of NetSuite customers, especially those with a lot of customizations, scripts, and integrations, started having challenges with their biannual upgrades and with testing for ongoing deployment. So they thought, wouldn't it be great if they came up with a way to automate testing? And Xcelero came to be. And it is the only automated testing app verified built for NetSuite. So basically, anyone that's familiar with SaaS software knows that any change in code, so any upgrade or e-fix, can break or disrupt a business, and that can be extremely costly. So Xcelero solves these problems by automating functional and regression testing. In addition, there's risk that custom roles can violate your segregation of duty rules, so we can also test for compliance and segregation of duties. A simple example of this would be if you have an AP clerk that shouldn't be able to issue a PO. We not only test to prove that he or she can't issue the PO, but we also grab screenshots along the way, including the permission violation. So you have a fully documented test. And then there's IT compliance risk. You not only have to be able to prove to auditors that you have good change control, but you have to show proof that you tested all the changes before you move to production. And then lastly, there's delays in rolling out new features and functions because of manual testing. Face it, business users aren't willing to wait months for new functionality. And UAT, neither side really likes it. So we love to say that Xcelero is your virtual testing environment. So by the time you do move to UAT, you pretty much know everything you need to know ahead of time. This is the spreadsheet that you can download from the NetSuite site. I'm sure a lot of folks on the call today have seen this before. Basically, it's an Excel spreadsheet, and testing is very manual, and it takes a lot of time. You have to physically go transaction by transaction, record your results, find the issues, fix them, and repeat the process all over again. So basically, Xcelero automates these phases in 3 simple steps. So the first is, 1, we help you capture the test data, and we do this with what we call auto-learning capabilities. It's really just a simple point and click in the NetSuite environment where you go to either the last transaction you created, or you can go in and pick specific transactions. Either way, Xcelero will auto-capture all of the data from those transactions to be used for your test execution. Second easy step is we help you define the pass-fail criteria. And there's 2 different ways to determine pass or fail. The first, at the user interface level while you're working on a screen, or at the database level after you hit save with save searches. And Karan will show you this in the demo in just a few minutes. And then lastly is the automated test execution. Not only do we give you the ability to automate the testing, but you can schedule your test at your convenience. Once you run all of your tests, you have a simple, easy-to-use dashboard where you can see your results and export your reports. The beauty of all of this is that none of this requires any coding or scripting. Xcelero was developed with the business analyst in mind so that it's very simple and easy to use. A lot of the generic testing tools may claim this, but in reality, they require a lot of technical acumen, and they're pretty difficult to use. We've done side-by-side comparisons with some of our customers with the generic tools, and what has sometimes taken 4 weeks with a generic tool has taken only 4 hours with Xcelero. So basically, to recap before we go on to the demo, customers love using Xcelero. We help them survive and thrive through deployments and biannual upgrades. It helps you avoid business disruption, which also saves you time and money, and we ensure that you can stay compliant. Quickly, this is just a sample of some of our customers. The point here is whether you're large or small, publicly traded, US-based or global, customers who need to test basically come from various industries and are very happy with automated testing with Xcelero. So if there are any questions, I can take them now, or we can hand off to Karan and we can jump right into the demo.
Awesome. No questions now, Julie, so I think we can hand it over to Karan for the demo.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Julie. And Liz, what you're seeing here on the screen is a dashboard view of Xcelero that shows you how you can manage your test cases, whether they are by your business requirements, by test plans, by projects, by process areas, or by test cycle, which gives you a quick view of what sort of coverage you have of the various process areas or test cycles, et cetera, et cetera. And this is something that allows you to plan and manage the testing effort. So we think about automated testing in terms of test cases that are transactions or forms, in general forms in NetSuite that you can replicate for the most part. We are also able to test scripts and trigger integrations as a part of testing, but a large majority of test cases tend to be forms. So we are going to talk about forms quite a bit, and then as time permits, we'll talk about testing of scripts and integrations as well. So one of the things that we always had in mind while we built Xcelero was to minimize the amount of effort it would take to create test cases in the first place. So if you remember the screen that Julie shared, where you see the spreadsheet with a number of test cases where you have to painfully record the pass fails and all the keystrokes that you have to take in order to complete a test case, we make that easy by learning these test cases. So for instance, if I say Autolearn test cases, I can point Xcelero to a set of transactions or records in your NetSuite environment, meaning your NetSuite sandbox environment, where you can say, I want to learn from the latest record that exists in this instance. So I can say that, this is the invoice that is a good test transaction for me. I can say learn from it. If this is not a good one, I can say that instead of invoice number 224, I want to use invoice number 210 instead. So what Xcelero will do at this point is when you hit submit, it will go through each of these records that are listed here, open the appropriate forms, and capture data from those pages without your having to do anything else. So at the end of this session, or at the end of this submit exercise, you would have 18 different test cases available to you, whether they came from the latest transaction or a transaction or a record of your choosing. You can easily have Xcelero learn those. And then beyond that, if there are other custom records or suitelets that you want to learn from, meaning have Xcelero learn from, you can point Xcelero to a URL or a global search string, and then once you provide that URL, Xcelero will open that URL again, capture the data from those pages, so that you would have a test case based on an entirely custom suitelet that you may have created for your NetSuite environment. So this is how easy it is to create test cases in Xcelero through the process of auto learning. The other auto learning that is possible is learning of process flows, and those process flows are some of the standard process flows like order to cash or procure to pay, where all you have to do is to simply point to a specific record in a flow. So for instance, if I said, okay, if there is an invoice number 184 that is part of an order to cash process flow, Xcelero can go up and down that chain and then be able to say that, okay, this represents an order to cash scenario, starting from the sales order number 1275, which was shipped by this shipment, which was billed to the customer with this invoice, and then the customer paid with the payment record here. So once you say submit here, Xcelero can create a process flow that you can then replicate on demand whenever you like. So that's the first piece to Xcelero, which is how our test cases created or captured, and we make that process as easy as possible, as you can see. There are other flows which could be your approval process flows or entirely custom records-based process flows. You can capture them easily using the browser extension that we have, which does the same thing that the Autolearn process does, except that it gives you more flexibility in terms of deciding what actions need to be taken at various points in time. So that's the first part to testing, capturing of test cases. Now, once you have these test cases captured, they are available to you in this list of test cases that I'm about to bring up. And what you see in this page is a number of records that were captured as test cases. So for instance, I have a purchase order record here. So if I open it, I can see that I have all the information that's presented on a purchase order form, such as the vendor information, such as the approvers, the departments, class, etc. And you also have all the sublist information or the line item information that shows you what items were part of that purchase order. So now what you can do with this page is maybe tweak some of this information to create a different scenario, because you probably have a number of variations of the purchase order transaction. So you can do so by tweaking this information on this page and then saving it as a new test case. You also have the ability to export this to a CSV file, and then that gives you the ability to mass create or mass import a number of test cases by simply using Excel, creating those variations in Excel, and then importing it in Xcelero. So now you, instead of having a handful of test cases, you could have hundreds of test cases if you wanted to have those many variations. So the other thing that I would like to mention here is that you also have the ability to define what alerts are presented as we go through these test cases, and you have the ability to rescan those test cases because you may make changes to those forms over a period of time, and Xcelero can update those for you. So those are some additional features. And we also have other things here, like how we can make the data dynamic by essentially using a different sequence number every time there is a new test case that is being executed. And it's relevant in cases where you have customer records where the customer name needs to be unique, or a vendor bill number needs to be unique, etc., etc. So those are some of the features around what can you do to manipulate those test cases, create a large number of those variations, etc. So that's that's how you manage test cases. And now, once you have these test cases, the next thing that you're probably wondering about is, so how do I now tell Xcelero what makes a successful test case versus an unsuccessful test case? So you can do so with the help of assertions, where you can indicate to Xcelero when a certain page loads or when a field changes, what do you want to validate? So as an example, I can say that when the page loads, I'm looking to verify the payment terms field to contain a certain value. So let me scroll down to this page here. Okay. So, okay, we can take a different example. I think I picked a different test case than I thought I was picking. So if there is an item that I want to verify, I can say that, okay, this is the value I'm expecting, or if I'm expecting a different value, I can put that value in the expected value field here, and then that will have Xcelero look at this field when the test case is executing, and then this is how a pass-fail criteria can be created. The other options being, you can do so before submit, after submit, or even on at the line level. You can look at the fields on the screen and then be able to compare that to the expected values. So that's one form of validation that's available. that takes place when the form is being entered and saved through the user interface. The other options are that you can do so at the data layer by simply using a saved search such as this, where all we're doing in this example is to confirm that the purchase order is in a pending approval status at the end of execution. And then you have the ability to add any criteria that you need from a business logic standpoint to confirm whether or not those criteria are being met in this completed transaction. So that's the second piece to Xcelero, which is how you define pass-fail criteria. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at is how do you execute these test cases and how do you see the results of execution. So creating a group means that you're simply combining a series of transactions which do not have a dependency between each other. So I can easily say that, okay, I want to be able to create a couple of purchase orders. So I'm going to add this transaction twice, just as an example. And then I can say what user is going to execute this. And then I say what role should we be under when we create this purchase order. And then we apply any pass-fail criteria here. So I can apply a pass-fail criteria. And then if there is a validation that I want to run using a saved search, I can say that, okay, confirm that this PO is in a pending approval status when it completes. In the second row here, we can try a different thing here and see if an AP clerk is able to create a purchase order. So that's an example that Julie talked about, where this should be something that is not permitted because the AP clerk should not have access to the purchase order transaction. So we call this a negative test, and then this allows you to confirm whether or not the role and the permission has been defined properly. So at this point, we can simply define the name of the group here, call it effect12 create PO group, and associate this with a project, with a test plan, with a business requirement, and a test cycle as appropriate, and a process area. So this allows you to, these are all optional attributes, but they allow you to classify test cases and groups so that you don't have to think about which test cases belong to what category. So we can simply say save or save and run here, and if I say submit, I'm going to be take a form where I have the option to schedule this execution at a certain time. So I can say schedule execution, and then I can just simply hit run. And that's how test cases are executed. Process flows are something very similar, where you have the ability to enter a series of transactions, which could be like a workflow approval process, where you walk Xcelero through those steps, and Xcelero is able to replicate them for you. So in order to see how those work, we can take a look at how test cases look like once they have been completed, and what do the executed test cases look like. So let us take a quick look at this one here. So this shows that the purchase order, the first purchase order transaction, it passed in the sense that the transaction was created, but the assertions failed. So if you scroll to the right, we can see in the notes link that we, whatever criteria we had defined in that assertion, like the payment terms, we expected to see net 45, the actual value was blank, so that validation failed. On field change, we expected the purchase contract field to be mandatory, and that failed because in the actual form, it was not mandatory. So that's how you can see the validations, whether they passed or failed. And then in the second test case, we had a similar situation where we looked at whether or not an AP clerk can enter a purchase order, and that failed because of a permission violation as we expected. So if we look at the notes link, not only will you see that error message, etc., but you would also be able to see a screenshot that shows you how the error message looked like, or what the error message looked like when the transaction could not be completed. So that's a quick view of the of what the executed test cases look like. This information is also available through reporting, where through test management summary, you can see the same exact information where you can click on the results of that particular execution here, and you can say download, which will create a PDF for you, and that PDF can then be shared with the developer or the NetSuite support or anybody who needs to understand what sort of testing was performed. So this shows you all of that information, including the screenshots, which will give you a comprehensive view of the test that was performed. So the other example that I want to quickly show you before we go on to any questions is an example of a process flow. So we can look at an order to cash type process flow, which also uses an integration. So I probably don't have time to go into a lot of depth here, but if we look at an example here, this is an order to cash scenario which was facilitated by a Dell Boomi iPaaS integration. So what you would see here is that in the first step, we ran the integration, we brought in opportunities that were closed won, and then we took the sales orders, say 2 sales orders through fulfillment, shipping, billing, and customer payment. So we did that for one ID, one sales order first, and then we did that for the second sales order next. So there is a lot of functionality in here that we probably don't have time to go into right now, but this is how process flows can be created and executed, and you can include integrations as a part of it. There is also the ability to trigger scripts along the way. So you see trigger scripts here. So you can say that, okay, after this transaction runs, I want to be able to run the script. So you can bring it in either in the same line as a transaction form, or you can do it independently as well. So that's another piece of functionality I wanted to mention. Lastly, you have documentation available in Xcelero where you can see how you do a certain thing, whether it is defining pass-fail criteria, defining your auto numbering sequences, how do you define alert messages, how do you create process flows, etc. So there is a lot of documentation available, including a user manual and a how-to type help. So with that, I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions that we can answer.
Awesome. Thanks, Karan. We have a few questions in the chat box. The first one being, can we test approval workflows in Xcelero?
Yes, you can. So what you can do is to capture those test cases, meaning if the first test case is a purchase order transaction followed by an approval by a controller or by a senior executive, you can simply step through these processes, and then you're able to replicate that process flow as needed. And I think I have an example of that somewhere here. Take a quick look here. So that allows you to test these process flows on demand as needed. So in this example here, I have an approval process flow for an inventory purchase order, which is less than $100,000. So you can see the flow here. The first step, we created a purchase order, and the second step, we had the controller approve it. And all of this was done by Xcelero. So that's how you can test workflows.
Thank you. Another one, are we able to test an end-to-end process such as order to cash?
Yes, so there are a couple of ways in which you can do it. One is that you can auto-learn an entire process flow, an example of which would be something similar to what I showed earlier. And the other would be to use the browser extension and step through these transactions so that you can replicate it on demand, and you can also include integrations if there are any along the way.
Thank you. So I have a few more. If we are working with a consultant, are they able to use the tool for us or with us?
Absolutely. So the assumption is that the consultant is working with you on your sandbox or your release preview environment. As long as that environment has Xcelero installed in it, they can be given the Xcelero administrator responsibility, which is what I've been in all along. They would be able to they would be able to help you in setting up those test cases and validating what's happening, how your environment is set up, how your customizations work, etc.
And then the last question that we have is, how long does it take to get up and running?
So our deployment process is pretty straightforward. A typical deployment doesn't take more than 3 weeks or so, and at the end of it, our customers are they have something like 30 to 40 test cases already defined and working, and more importantly, they've had the training, they've had the hands-on exercises which allow them to be self-sufficient in creating their own test case repository.
All right, well, that's all we had for questions. Thank you both very much. Any last words, Julie or Karan?
Thank you for giving us the opportunity, and we hope to talk to you and see if we can help you in making sure that any changes to your environment don't break when they are promoted to production.
Great. All right, well, thank you, everyone, for attending, and a recording of this will be sent out after. So thanks, everyone.